A divided Supreme Court today supported the centerpiece of President Obama's health care reform law, upholding Obamacare as the law of the land. Conservative Chief Justice John Roberts joined the court's liberal wing for a 5-4 majority, upholding Obamacare's individual mandate. That forced Americans to buy insurance or pay a penalty, a tax. The Chief Justice wrote, "Because the Constitution permits such a tax, it is not our role to forbid it or to pass upon its wisdom or fairness."
The question is, did Congress have the power? And Chief Justice Roberts found a different power.
The High Court rejected a mandatory expansion of Medicaid, saying the federal government can ask states to provide new benefits, but cannot throw them out of the Medicaid system if they don't. It is one of the most sweeping decisions in decades and will impact the health care every American can expect.
Today's decision by the Supreme Court is a rigorous, resounding confirmation of the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act. It is great news for America's families, businesses, and our economy.
It's also a stunning victory for a president who wagered his political legacy on the health care fight. Congressional Republicans vow they will dismantle the law. What began as President Obama's signature achievement, now an American legal landmark. Brian Moore, NBC News, Washington.
Thank you, Brian. 12:07 on today's TMJ4. More than 500,000 Wisconsin residents do not have health insurance. It's about 9% of our population. Our Charles Benson just got done talking with Congressman Paul Ryan, Republican, about the Supreme Court decision.
Congressman Paul Ryan, thank you very much for joining us. We only have a few minutes here, but let me get your reaction. President Obama today calling the Supreme Court decision a victory for America. Do you see any wins here for Wisconsin?
I don't see wins here for Wisconsin. Unfortunately, I'm not deterred by this. I'm disappointed by this ruling. It means that this new health care law is still in place. It means that the people of Wisconsin and the rest of the country will decide through their elected leaders in this next election whether this law truly stands or not. This law is bad for Medicare. This law is bad for people who have private health insurance. It's going to raise their premiums. It raises people's taxes. It's bad for jobs. And I really do believe that this law will decrease the quality of health insurance we have in this country. Charles, we can have affordable access to health insurance, including for people with pre-existing conditions, without the government taking it over. Unfortunately, what the Supreme Court ruled is you can tax anybody to doing virtually anything if you call it a tax. The president specifically said in selling this law that this was not a tax, it was a mandate. The Supreme Court said if it's a mandate, then it's unconstitutional, but if it's a tax, it's constitutional, and they're calling it a tax now. So I think it's an unfortunate ruling, and I think it's going to have to basically be determined by who wins the next election determines whether this law truly stands or not.
So what is wrong with requiring people to buy insurance who don't have it or at this point can't afford it? Wouldn't it be better if everyone does have insurance?
The question is there a limiting principle to the federal government? Is there a limit to what the federal government can make you do or not do? And what the ruling does say is they can't make you do something that you don't want to do, but if you call it a tax, you can tax somebody into doing something. Here's the problem with this, Charles. What this law in effect does is it will make it harder for insurance companies to offer competitive products. Everybody will be forced to have the government mandated kind of insurance. It will encourage employers to dump their people in the government exchange. That will raise costs for the government. It will explode the deficit. It will restrict quality and choice. And it takes $500 billion from Medicare to spend on Obamacare. And then it puts a new panel of 15 people in charge of price controlling Medicare in ways that we believe will lead to denied care for seniors. So we think this is bad for Medicare. We think it restricts choices of health insurance. And we think it's a budget buster. And so we think this is going to hurt us in job creation. And we think it will take away the kind of innovation and competition that we ought to have in healthcare. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court didn't rule it out of order. They claimed that it was constitutional, and that means this issue is going to have to be, basically determined by the next election.
Now, the Republicans are talking about repealing this law. Let me lay out this scenario. Their votes are in the House. It's unclear if the votes will be in the Senate after the election. There's a possibility you could be the vice president. You could be the tiebreaker on this in a scenario where it comes down to one vote. Would you want to be that vice president? You're being vetted right now.
That's a nice way of getting that kind of a question into that, Charles. That's one of the more creative ways of asking that question that I've seen. That's pretty good. Look, my view on this is extremely clear. I didn't vote for this law in the first place. I voted to repeal it already earlier this year. I'll vote to repeal it on July 11th because I really do believe this law is a job killer. I believe it's bad for healthcare. I believe it's going to implode and destroy the quality of our current healthcare system. I believe it's really bad for Medicare in particular. And so I think we have better ideas on how to replace this law so we can fix what is legitimately a problem, access to affordable health care for all Americans. I've offered lots of legislation that deal with that. I think there's a better way to do this without having such a government takeover of health care. What this effectively does, Charles, is it says the Supreme Court has allowed this effective government takeover of health care, and I don't think that's what American people want. And I believe this fall they're going to have the final say-so through their elected representatives in the next election as to whether or not this government takeover of healthcare stands or not.
Well, with about 30 seconds left, I mean, are you more inspired today by today's decision than more inspired to go back to Congress to try to repeal it, or maybe move to the executive side and have a bigger voice there to try to get it repealed?
Again, nice try on the question. I have more of an incentive to fix this problem by repealing this law and replacing it with true patient-centered healthcare reforms.
I appreciate your time, Congressman Ryan.
You bet, Charles. Take a good one.
And 12 minutes after the noon hour, and Charles Benson joins us now on set. We'll get back to your 0 for 2 shot on the vice president. They're right, but he did appreciate your effort. Let's talk about the fact that this had to be a surprise, Charles, by anyone who was looking at how this case was argued before the justices and the questions the justices were asking of the attorneys at the time. Everything seemed to indicate that, at the very least, the court was going to overturn the individual mandate. This had to be a surprise to a lot of people that you've talked to.
Well, on one hand, the Republicans won on the mandate issue because Justice Roberts agreed with him on that. It's this tax issue that has everybody kind of confused, and I think that's what that will dominate the debate now between now and the presidential election. The president all along here has said that this was not a tax, but the Supreme Court just said, yes, it is a tax, and that was the window that gave him the opportunity to do this, move forward and uphold the law as it is. So that will be one of the issues here as the Republicans go forward. The other one here is the Republicans believe that they're going to have to try to repeal this law, and that's why this election is going to have a huge it's going to matter. This election is going to matter because Republicans are determined to try to repeal this. Now, on the other hand, Democrats thinking this is a good opportunity. This is what they have asked for, what they have wanted, and so they see this as a huge victory and a huge victory for President Obama.
Charles, opinions are split. Satisfied with the decision, disappointed with the decision. Who does this help and who does this hurt?
Well, that's what I think is unclear about this right now, because a lot of it has not kicked in. I mean, this idea of people having to buy insurance won't kick into 2014. So a lot of the so-called benefits that President Obama sees in this law have not kicked in. I think some people do like the idea that pre-existing conditions, if people are kicked out of that and don't have a chance to get insurance or can afford insurance, they would like the opportunity to be able to afford it without this pre-existing condition being a part of it. And then those folks who have kids who are 22, 23, 25, the law allows people to stay on their parents' coverage until 26. So there are some good things in this, but I think the biggest surprise, especially when you look at the justices there, the biggest surprise for Republicans is that Roberts sided with the liberal voice of the bench there, and he was appointed by a Republican president. I think that's what's going to surprise them the most, that he was the deciding vote.
Interesting analysis. You'll get back to us when the congressman wants to talk more about the vice president.
Looking forward to it. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Charles. And we got to take a quick break. Democrats call it a historic decision. We'll have more on that coming up, but we're going to take a quick break right now.